Hi and welcome again. We are looking at gait analysis, and in this video we're going to look at instrumentation in gait analysis. What kind of instruments, what kind of technology are we using in gait analysis? Okay, so there are a lot of things that you can use in gait analysis, and I've just made a list of the things that we are doing here, and we'll just go through that in detail. So I'm not going to read out the list for you here. So the first thing that you can do is you can just visually examine a gait, right? So you can ask a patient or a person who is getting the gait analysis done to just walk as the doctor or the clinician is watching the person. And that gives us a reasonable amount of information about the gait, right? You can see whether the joints are uh, properly working, or there is one joint that is stiff. And in fact, we do that sometimes, right? So if I come and I have a slight limp on one of my legs, you would notice it and you would say, oh, something is wrong with you. You're not walking very well. So that's visual gait analysis. And as clinicians get more and more experienced, they are able to just look at a person and say certain things about the person. I had a friend, and on Sunday I was talking to him, and he said that he went to a clinician and he just walked in, and the clinician said, "Oh, I can see that your hamstrings are very tight." And that guy was a little surprised. How do you know that? And then the clinician explained that there was a certain characteristic way in which he was walking, which just showed that one the hamstrings in one of his legs was very very tight, and he had to get a massage or something to get that right. Okay, so that's possible. But of course, visual gait analysis involves the experience of the clinician. Also, you can't repeatedly watch the same gait. You'll have to again and again make the subject or the patient walk to be able to see it again. So, one of the ways in which you can just improve upon it is by doing a video recording. And this is what we saw. We saw the recording of a lady walking where the gait analysis was done. And one of the ways that this gait analysis is done is you use two cameras, right? Excuse me. So one to get the front view of the person walking, and another to get the side view of the person walking, right? And you ask the person to walk from one side to the other. And also what you can do is you can mark a certain distance that he has to walk. So maybe you do one or two steps before the actual what do you say field of vision of the camera. Okay, so one or two steps so that the gait stabilizes, because initially when you start walking your gait is a little odd because you're not in the stride. So you take a few steps here, you get into the field of vision, you measure, and then you get out. And if we know the distances, or if we have some markers placed on the floor, we can even measure the time that it takes to walk, let's say a fixed amount of distance, probably 6 meters or something of that kind, right? So that's one way of doing it. Now, the advantages of video recording are that you can store the gait, so you don't have to ask the patient to walk again and again. And you can store it and then compare it over time as well to see how the gait is changing as you do a particular clinical intervention. It's also good because you can refer the gait to another clinician and ask for his opinion about things. So there are various advantages of video recording, as you would be able to imagine. Great. So uh, next, you could have foot switches put on the shoes that the person is wearing. So for example, here on the shoes, you have some switches placed. Now, how do switches help? So one of the ways in which the switches help is because they tell you which phase of gait you are in, right? So if you have a switch on the heel, for example, you can detect heel contact or the initial contact in the gait cycle, right? If you are if the heel and the switches on your metatarsals both are touching the ground, then you can kind of say that your foot is flat or uh, uh, on the ground. And then as the heel starts to rise, you can talk about heel rise phase. And if all the switches are off, you can say that you're on the swing phase. So it helps you to kind of delineate the gait cycle and detect the gait cycle. So that's one thing that people use. You can also have many switches on the shoes instead of just two or three, and that will help you to really uh, decipher what's happening and divide the gait cycle and which phase you are in very, very nicely. Okay, so that's another way to do it. Uh, Another way to do the same thing to detect uh, the stages of gait cycle that you are in, and also to measure the pressure that your foot is exerting on the ground, or the force that uh, um, the foot is exerting on the ground, is to use an instrumented walkway. Okay, imagine a walkway here which is basically instrumented. There are some kinds of pressure sensors there. Let's say this entire thing is has pressure sensors built into it, and let's say the pressure sensors are the kind of pressure sensors that give you a map of the pressure across this walkway, and they record this over time. As the person is walking, you will be able to get maps like this, right? Where are the high pressures, where are the low pressures in the feet. You will be able to measure where are the steps, what's the angle of the foot, the walking pace, the stride length, all those kinds of things by using such an instrumented walkway. Is that okay? Uh, while you're walking, you also want to be measuring the angles of your joints, and one way to do that is to use a goniometer. We have studied goniometers when we did potentiometers in the first half of the module, right? And a very, very simple goniometer, a one axis goniometer, is just a potentiometer with two scales on it, right? You put the potentiometer on the scales, and as the angle changes, the resistance of the potentiometer changes, and that gives you a measurement of the angle. Now you can have more complicated goniometers. So here we are using a 3-axis goniometer that can measure angle not just in one plane, but it can measure angle in three different planes, right? So you could do that. You could also have goniometers made out of, let's say, strain gauges and connected along the knee to measure angles. And in this case, depending on how the strain gauge is placed, probably you'll have a 1-axis goniometer, right? So those give you the angles, the joint angles, which also are very important, right? Which we saw that they may be required for analyzing gait. Great. Uh, Force plates are used. Now, force plates are basically devices that can measure ground reaction forces. So basically, when you stand on this force plate and you exert a particular force, the force plate not just measures the magnitude of the force, but it also measures the direction of the force. And again, depends on the type of force plate, but there are 3-axis force plates which can measure the direction in all 3 directions. Sometimes you have a 1-axis force plate. Sometimes you could just have no direction and only a magnitude as well. Okay, so these force plates are basically placed on the walkway where the person is walking. And usually it's quite difficult to have force plates all around the walkway or many force plates. And what you do is you place your force plates like this, one force plate here and one force plate here. The idea being that as the person is walking, he would put one foot on this force plate and one foot on this force plate. And sometimes the force plates are marked and the person is asked, you need to step, as you're walking, please step into this force plate and this force plate as both, so that we can measure the ground reaction forces. Okay, so that's another instrument that is quite commonly used. And usually, the gait analysis lab is a big lab where all these or many of these things um, are kind of what do you say, integrated together. So you have an instrumented walkway with force platforms. You have cameras that are measuring the person and angles and the gait. You have an EMG transmitter that is measuring the EMG of the muscles, and all these you are kind of recording at the same time so that you can have a synchronous recording of all your measurements. Usually, instead of using goniometers in a gait lab, what we do is we use video, and sometimes also instead of just using normal video, what we do is we put markers on the body. Markers are basically either IR lights or visual lights, and you want to measure those markers so that you can get the joint angles and the stride length and the speed of walking and all those kinds of characteristics. Okay, and the markers are placed in this uh, on the body, and a typical way of placing this would be like this, right? So you place a marker on the trunk, you place a marker between the hip joint and the knee joint, you place a marker between the knee joint and the ankle joint, and you place a few markers on the foot. Now, if you can locate each of the positions of the markers, then what you can do is you can get the angle, uh, you can get the hip angle, isn't it? Because you know you know the position of these markers, and you know the position of these markers initially when the person is just standing, and as it moves, you can calculate uh, how what is the angle. You can calculate the angle between the knee joint by looking at these markers and these markers. You can calculate the ankle markers and so on and so forth. Okay. And one of the reasons why in this diagram that it's not just two cameras but many cameras is because you need those many cameras to be able to calculate the positions of each of these markers in three-dimensional space, and then you do some mathematics on these markers, on the locations of these markers, and you combine each of these camera videos or to get the three-dimensional location of the markers. Okay, great. So that was the instrumentation for measuring gait. Uh, Next, what I have done is I have put a link to a YouTube video where it's a very nice video where this person talks about how you can actually look at gait and find out some common abnormalities in gait, and and how clinicians can actually see gait and find out that there is a certain problem there. So take a look at that, and that would finish the material for the gait analysis here. All the best.